Welcome to That's Good Sports. I'm your master of embarrassment, Brandon Perna. The NFL season's finally here. And just look at all the hope these fan bases have. We stupidly enter every season with the idea that our team can make the playoffs. Especially now that the tournament has been expanded to 14 teams. The NFL is allowing 44% of the league to play meaningful football in January. 26 different teams have made the playoffs since 2020. That's 81% of the league. Still, there are a couple teams that haven't made the playoffs since Obama was president, and a few more who haven't had a playoff win since Bush was president and Bush was playing on the radio. Don't let the days go by. Today I want to dig into the current deplorable stories, but also I'm going to break down some of the longest playoff droughts ever in NFL history, because if you don't know your history, you're likely to get it wrong on a test, right? That's good sports! Not only do we have all of the cursed logo shirts at benchwarmershop.com, we've upgraded our looks. You've got 5 points, HBTC, the backup blend, my blend, urinating tree, F the refs, from light to dark. The roasts, we're all very pasty, but I think we got to sell out of the old labels, but we've got a new look, and you can collect them all. Benchwarmershop.com. It's my coffee, and your favorite creator's coffee. When we think of the Green Bay Packers, we think of, well, welfare scandals, avoiding vaccines in the darkness, and watching love continue a long tradition of QB winning. But the Packers did suck for a very long time, but it was back when your grandpapa was watching football and smoking cigarettes like a Swiftie buying Taylor Swift merch. The Packers from 1945 to 1960 missed the playoffs for 15 straight years, the longest drought in franchise history. Now, this is obviously a surprising one because we all think about the Packers of yesteryear as this grand old powerhouse running the NFL with Don Hutson and dominating the 60s behind Vince Lombardi, Bart Starr, and the most devastating stable of white running backs you've ever seen. What's fascinating, though, is this drought was bookended by a championship in 1944, congrats on winning while the real men were in Normandy, Packers, and a championship appearance in 1960. Then you've got the Arizona Cardinals, who also experienced a 15-year playoff drought around their relocation to Phoenix. And you know who got them out of that hole? The great Jake the Snake Plumber, a local hero from Arizona State who became a second-round pick of the desperate Cardinals, and not only got them back into the playoffs, but actually won a game, defeating the Dallas Cowboys in the wild card round as a touchdown underdog. Unfortunately, the Cards were plunged back into the abyss after 1998 and have only made the postseason 6 times since making the move to the desert from St. Louis. God, St. Louis really hates keeping its football teams, doesn't it? Between 1936 and 1952, the Detroit Lions did not reach the playoffs for 16 straight years, marking one of the longest droughts in their early history. Now, I find it a little difficult to care about playoff droughts that occurred during the FDR administration, but it was tough to actually make the playoffs back then before our participation trophy culture mandated that 14 out of 32 teams make the postseason. Then you've got the Philadelphia Eagles from 61 to 78. That's a 17-year playoff drought, which, as you might know, is the impetus for the famous Mark Wahlberg film Invincible. Yes, Philly was so bad they held an open tryout and signed Vince Papale, a 30-year-old rookie who spent 3 seasons with the team. Now, Papale was actually signed after a private workout, but of course that doesn't make for an interesting plot point in a Disney movie. He also didn't score a touchdown like he did in the movie, but overall it's not bad as far as mid-career Wahlberg flicks go.
Stop critiquing me, okay? I'm a human being. I'm not a piece of art.
Anyways, the Eagles got back to the playoffs with Dick Vermeil and Ron Jaworski and lost the Super Bowl in 1980 to the Raiders. The Giants were on a 17-year drought from 64 to 81. What saved them? Well, Bill Parcells and Just a man who loved cocaine and underage prostitutes. No, not Phil Simms. I'm talking about Lawrence Taylor, who won not just Defensive Rookie of the Year, but also Defensive Player of the Year with 9.5 sacks and a pick 6, eventually winning a pair of Super Bowls in the 80s with Parcells at the helm. Then we've got the Cleveland Browns, who missed the postseason from 2003 to 2020, 17 straight years, before finally breaking the streak in 2020 with Baker Mayfield, who they let walk 2 years later. Now, the streak began when the Browns collapsed in the wild card round against the Steelers, and it didn't end until 2020 when they blew out the Steelers in the wild card. Interesting little juxtaposition there, isn't it? A lot of you don't even know what juxtaposition means, so who cares? The Browns actually had a 10-win season during the middle of the drought in 2007, with Derek Anderson randomly having a career year at quarterback. The Browns won double-digit games with the top 10 offense, but in Week 17, they needed the Colts to win. Of course, Indy rested their starters, and the Titans took the Browns' spot in the postseason. An extremely Brownsy thing to happen. Cleveland has, of course, made it to the playoffs twice following the drought, most recently with Joe Flacco at the helm. Also got rid of him. Beep, 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 beep. Breaking update, we are over 1,000 signups at Underdog. That's right, 1,000 of you have used my code, That's Good. And again, if we get to 10,000 signups, Underdog owes me $1 million, which means we are less than 9,000 away from hitting that, so it is very possible we can do it. What am I gonna do with that money if I get it? I'm investing it back in this channel. I'm gonna pay Will Keys, who helps write every episode you see here, more money. I'm gonna help Johnny Barks, who edited this video, more money. And then I'm gonna send my child to college. She's only 4, but it's time she go. It's time she go. Also, there's less than 24 hours for you to use this Cortland Sutton special. It is for Game 1, Week 1. The only way you get it is with my code, That's Good. It is a gimme pick for their higher or lower game. It is a special just for you guys for Week 1, but we're almost there. Today's episode was indeed sponsored by Underdog. Yeah, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. Then you've got the Buffalo Bills from 2020 to 2017, 17-year drought, which ended in 2017. After really dominating the AFC in the 90s, or at least the early 90s, the Bills had an impossibly brutal end to the decade when Kevin Dyson caught some kind of a pass from Frank Wycheck and beat Buffalo on what became known as the Music City Miracle. It felt like that stink followed them into the new millennium, and Buffalo couldn't get over the hump in the 2000s. They were rarely awful, but never had double-digit wins, and actually got into the playoffs in 2017 with 9 wins. That was pre-Josh Allen with Tyrod Taylor, and in fact, it was the same year that Nathan Peterman threw 5 picks in one half against the Chargers. Buffalo got in as a wild card, gave the Jaguars a good fight in due fall, but fell in a 10-3 thriller. But here we're getting into the upper echelon of droughts. The Saints, who joined the NFL in 1967, took 20 years to make their first playoff appearance. The third longest drought in NFL history. Now, they were so bad that they popularized the paper bag over the head at games as fans and wasted 12 years of a Manning at quarterback. Father Manning was a 2-time Pro Bowler and once got the Saints to 8-8 in 1979, but never got over the hump in the NFC. When the Saints finally ended the drought, it was in 1987 with Jim Mora coaching and Bobby Herbert at QB. The second longest playoff drought ever? Shocker, the Steelers endured a 24-year playoff drought from 1948 to 72. This is genuinely surprising. The Steelers were the team of the 70s, one of the NFL's most iconic dynasties, but before that, they were really a poverty franchise. The end of the drought started with the hiring of head coach Chuck Noll in 1969, who, by the way, is still only 2 coaches ago for the Steelers. They absolutely crushed the draft for several years, and in 1974, they picked 5 Hall of Famers in one single draft. Now, the first Steelers playoff game after ending the drought was a 13-7 win over the Raiders, which you might recognize for a pretty cool play at the end called the The immaculate reception. Imagine waiting 24 years for a playoff game and that's how it ends. That's like waiting 24 years for sex and then losing your virginity to Ryan Gosling. Sorry, no, I mean Glenn Powell. No, God, I mean Chris Hemsworth. Fuck, no! Losing it, Sydney Sweeney. Yeah, Sydney Sweeney. That's what I meant.
All naked, sudsed up.
And the record for longest playoff droughts ever, it's a tie between the Washington Redskin Potatoes and the St. Louis Cardinals, who went 25 years without a postseason appearance. They were old enough to rent a car. Now, the Cardinals obviously never rebounded to win a Super Bowl, but the R-words made the Super Bowl under legendary coach George Allen before Joe Gibbs took over and turned them into one of the great teams of the 80s and early 90s. More recently, though, the Commanders have a much more interesting streak going on. Their last playoff victory came in 2005. Well, 2005 season, it was the 06 playoffs there. But that's the third longest streak. The Commies have had 3 names since 2005, but only 1 playoff win. The last time they tasted sweet victory in the postseason was January of 06 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Joe Gibbs was in his second season after returning to coach the team, and they went on the road to best Tampa Bay. A week later in Seattle, though, they lost by 10 to the eventual NFC champions, and they haven't won in the postseason since. Washington has made the playoffs just 4 times since 2005, losing each time in the wild card round. They lost to Seattle 2 years later, lost to Seattle again in 2012, the year that RG3's knee imploded on the FedEx turf, lost to Green Bay at home in 2015, and lost once again at home to Tampa, the year the Bucs went on to win the Super Bowl as a wild card team. Do I think they can break the playoff losing streak this year? Probably not this season, but I'm praying for their fans that shedding themselves of Dan Snyder and drafting Jaden Daniels pays dividends, because they've been waiting a very long time for something good to happen to their organization. The Raiders' last playoff victory was in 2002. The Raiders made it all the way to Super Bowl 37 and got mollywopped by their former head coach Jonathan Gruden and the defensive-heavy Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a game so traumatizing it kept them out of the postseason for a decade and a half. Oakland was legitimately awful during the stretch where they kept missing the playoffs, probably hitting their absolute valley when they went 2-14 in 2006 and were rewarded with the opportunity to draft Jamarcus Russell. What a sweepstakes that was. It's like winning the lottery and then finding out you're going to be paid in NFTs. Now, the Raiders finally put it all together and made the playoffs in 2016, but they were doomed. Despite putting up a 12-4 record, they finished second in the AFC West and were forced to go on the road to Houston. Also, quarterback Derek Carr broke his fucking leg, and they were down to their third-string quarterback Connor Cook.
It's broke! It's broke! It's broke! It's broke!
Didn't go well, as they managed to let Brock Osweiler win an actual playoff game, and then they spiraled out after, failing to make the playoffs again until 2021, which, if you recall, they could have tied the Chargers in Week 18, and both teams could have gotten into the playoffs, but Rich Bisaccia and the Raiders went for the kill in a classic AFC West matchup. The Raiders emerged victorious in the regular season finale, getting into the postseason, but fell in the playoff opener a week later to the Bengals. But the Raiders have failed to make it back to the postseason and have an uphill battle this year with their quarterback room. And then you have the Miami Dolphins in sole possession of the longest playoff drought without a win, dating back to the year 2000. It definitely feels like the last Dolphins playoff win should have been with Dan Marino, but alas, it came a year after he retired. Dave Wannstedt took over for Jimmy Johnson as head coach. Jay Fiedler succeeded Dan Marino, and Miami was hosting Peyton Manning in the 2000 wildcard round. great game. The Dolphins fell behind 14-0 before erasing the deficit, and Lamar Smith ended it in overtime with a 17-yard touchdown run. Miami got blanked a week later by the Raiders, and they have yet to win in the postseason. Now, the Fins have made it to the postseason 5 times since the year 2000. 2 straight losses to the Ravens, 1 to the Steelers, 1 to the Bills, and of course last year in the frigid cold at Kansas City. Now, I think it's most interesting that the closest the Dolphins got to winning a playoff game was indeed on the road at the Bills, with their starting quarterback being Skylar Thompson, starting in place of Tua and Teddy B. Miami was down 17-0 early in that game and somehow took the lead in the third quarter before Buffalo got it back under control. Miami is definitely good enough to win a playoff game and do it this season. The question is whether their speed and finesse translates to the postseason, and also whether or not they can secure a game or 2 at home, which seems crucial for them. And finally, to the most embarrassing part of this episode, we've got a tie for third place for the longest active playoff droughts, which belong to the Panthers and Falcons. It's been 6 seasons since these teams tasted postseason hope. And while we have very little hope for Bryce Young and the Panthers this year, the Falcons are in a great position to snap that playoff drought with Kirk Cousins. But there are 2 franchises that have the longest active playoff droughts in the NFL. In fact, these aren't just the longest active playoff droughts in the NFL. The number 1 team today has the longest streak of avoiding the playoffs in all of North American sports after the Sacramento Kings broke their drought about a year and a half ago. First, we've got the Broncos, who famously won the Super Bowl in February of 2016 and have not returned to the playoffs since. Not only have they not made it, they haven't been alive for a playoff spot in the final week of the regular season since 2015. We can all put our finger on why this has been the case, though, right? The Broncos have cycled through 5 head coaches since winning the Super Bowl, from Kubiak to Sean Payton, and have trotted out something like 300 different starting quarterbacks since Peyton Manning hoisted the Lombardi for a second time. Obviously, the biggest reasons they've dodged the tournament for so long are the misses at QB, whether that's drafting Paxton Lynch, not drafting Josh Allen, or giving all of the picks and money in the world for Russell Wilson. And of course, when teams were hiring coaches like Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, and Kyle Shanahan, the Broncos zagged and made Vic Fangio their head man. And yes, there was also Nathaniel Hackett in there. Denver had a decent shot to break the drought last year when they got to 7-6 after starting 1-5, but a horrific performance at home against the lowly Patriots assured that they would not make the playoffs, nor did they deserve to make the playoffs. Can they do it this year? I don't know. They might be a year away based on Bo Nix's schedule. I do think they're a more talented team than they get credit for, but as Mark Schlereth has said, they lack household names. Sean Payton himself hasn't made the playoffs since 2020 when the Saints went 12-4, and I think his influence is finally going to rub off on this team now that they've purged themselves of the Danger Witch. But the bells of the balls are the New York Jets. The Jets made the AFC title game in 2009 and 2010. It feels like a different time now, but they managed to do it with Rex Ryan and Mark Sanchez, 2 guys who feel like they've been doing TV for the last 50 years at this point. The Jets were on a path to make it back to the playoffs in 2011, but they absolutely fell apart after starting 8-5, losing their last 3 games, and putting an end to what seemed like a very promising run with Sanchez and Darrelle Revis. Since their drought started, the Jets have posted a single winning record. That happened in 2015, a Fitzmagical campaign, when Ryan Fitzpatrick tossed a Jets single-season record 31 TDs, 26 of them in the direction of either Brandon Marshall or Eric Decker. Unfortunately, it was one of those years in the AFC when 10 wins was not good enough to qualify for the postseason. Since then, they've set themselves back by drafting Sam Darnold, picking Zach Wilson, and hiring Adam Gase. The Jets have gone 7-10 in each of the last 2 years, but obviously we expect something better now that Aaron Rodgers is indeed recovered from that Achilles tear. Aaron Rodgers has to end the longest postseason drought in all of American sports, with the Jets sitting at 13 straight seasons without getting into the postseason. I'm not sure that the NFL is comfortable with teams having these kinds of droughts. The league loves parity, right? They love fans having hope, and that's part of the reason they added 2 playoff spots in the mix a few years ago. I don't think we'll ever see another playoff drought as long as the Jets are currently suffering through. So, I think we're still witnessing history, guys. And no offense to Jets fans, but I am rooting for this streak to stay alive, since my Broncos are right behind you in second place. Thanks for watching That's Good Sports. Welcome back, football. Again, don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. If you don't subscribe, then your team is going to miss the playoffs for the next 20 years. You don't want to do that to yourself, do ya?